Welcome to the Oldmansailing Book Club. Today we're going to start the voyage number 2, Falmouth to Grenada. Dedication. This book is for Kenrick, a magician with a welding torch. He fixed the rudder. Epigraph from Mark Twain. Catch the trade winds in your sails. Explore, dream, discover. Introduction. Nobody goes to Grenada from Falmouth, so the title is a bit of a cheat. In fact, this is 2 voyages, or possibly even 3. But without the first one, you couldn't attempt the second, or the third. Your problem is that you can't cross the southern path of the North Atlantic Ocean until November, at least not if you don't want to get tangled up with the hurricane season. However, November is too late to be setting off from the UK. The back of the North Atlantic Passage charts tells you all about it, month by month. For November, it says, an ideal month to leave from the east coast of the States for the Caribbean. But goes on. If you have not left Falmouth, wait until the following year. September, on the other hand, is a good month. Last time I left on September the 10th and got to Lanzarote in 13 days. The whole point in going to the Canary Islands is, of course, because you have to kill those 2 months somewhere. So, what am I doing in Falmouth on October the 1st? When the back of the chart tells me leaving Falmouth in October is acceptable, but get a good weather report. I have a good weather report for 2000 hours tomorrow. Whether I will leave is another matter. It depends on whether the parcel of spares for the watermaker arrives. The watermaker is the reason I'm not already sitting in the beach bar in Fuerteventura instead of Pendennis Marina and having closed the hatch because the rain was blowing in. It is important that I bore you with the tale of the watermaker, because it is the last item on the great refit list, which will probably turn out to have a considerable bearing on the way the voyage turns out. Samsara is 50 years old this year. Yes, this is an old boat this old man is sailing. She came out of the mould at Marine Construction Limited of Southampton in August 1973 and was promptly loaded onto a lorry to be taken to Wolverhampton, where a particularly meticulous engineer called Alfred Maley set about fitting her out as no rival 32 had been fitted out before. Ignoring all the naysayers who told him things like, if you try to put in 2 decent-sized berths by moving the mast support, the deck will collapse. Well, 50 years later, it hasn't. But other things did. I have written about the big refit elsewhere. See the blog. It was a long list, and I took for my inspiration Lord Nelson. When he raised his flag aboard HMS Victory in 1803, she was already 38 years old. The refit he demanded from the Admiralty cost more than they had paid to build her in the first place. Similarly, Samsara's refit was eye-watering. New rig, new sails, new chain plates and deck bolts, new autopilot, new anti-fouling, new seacocks, new hatch, new headlining, new cooker, new anchor, new spray hood, and matching sail cover with Oldmansailing.com everywhere. Then there was an enormous lightweight sail called a Super Zero. In other words, I'm ready. If the parcel of spares arrives tomorrow, there is what the back of the chart calls a good weather report. I have 46 cans of beer, 6 tubes of Pringles, and have given up on trying to get the Navtex to work. Sod it, I'm going. Day 0. How come it was 9:15? I had things to do. That was why I had set the alarm for 7:30. set it but not activated it, if you must know. This was a shame, because I was going to have a shower so that I could try out my impulse-bought biodegradable Dragon's Den internet deodorant, and then have the last 2 eggs in the box scrambled for breakfast, because the third to last had broken, and pretty soon things were going to get smelly. None of which works if you wake up an hour and a quarter late. Of course, I could have breakfast ashore at the 4 T's Tea Room. Now, there was an idea. The 4 T's Tea Room is one of the very best things about Falmouth, along with Habanero's Burrito Bar and Finn McCool's Pub, which doesn't have a kitchen, so they invite you to bring your own takeaway to have with your Guinness. Pausing only to buy 4 loaves of Kingsmill 50/50, the world's longest-lasting bread, just don't ask what they put in it to make it last that long, I presented myself at the 4 T's on the stroke of 10 o'clock. It really is worth waiting for breakfast if you're having it there. An enormous lady on 2 walking sticks heaves herself up to take your order. She won't hear of you pausing at the reception desk. "I'll come to you, dear." Then you can order anything you like, and as much of it as the cook can balance on the plate. Then I remembered. They don't open on Monday and Tuesday. I went to Wetherspoons instead. It would have been worth the lady with the sticks opening up. There was a cruise ship in, as I discovered when I set up for my 20 minutes busking before chucking out time at the marina at 12 o'clock. Busking has become quite a theme this summer. I have a Woody Allen Pee Wee Russell playlist on my phone, along with Sidney Bechet's Petite Fleur, of course. These are played through a little Bluetooth speaker, just heavy enough to balance the open clarinet case, which carries a cardboard sign announcing, "I don't want your money, you haven't got any change anyway, but take a leaflet, buy a book." Sure enough, on the ground at my feet, as I play along to Papa's B-flat blues and Tie Me to Your Apron Strings, is a Bon Maman jam jar with a curl of leaflets advertising the Oldmansailing book. If I shift half a dozen, I reckon I've done well. But never as well as this. Today, people were clapping and dancing and filming me on their phones. One nice lady gave me £2. Cruise ship passengers delight in anything. Better still, the spares for the watermaker did arrive, and the 7-month supply of vitamins I had left off the supplement order. Also the 3 spare phone cables, because there's something about boat life they just don't take to. I was ready to go. Just one more thing to do: top up the fuel tank. According to the Windy app, I would meet an area of high pressure with calms off Ushant, which would sit there doing nothing for 36 hours. And it should be only 70 miles wide. I could motor through it if I had to, as long as the little fuel tank was filled to the brim when I started. And that was where things went wrong. Coming up to the fuel pontoon at a good clip, because the wind would blow me off as soon as I stopped, I slipped my mooring bight over the pontoon cleat, hauled on the tail round the winch, and the bit that I hadn't noticed was lying casually looped over the top of the guardrail. And it suddenly went bar taut, and with 5 tons of boat moving inexorably forward, snapped the stanchion like a twiglet. Of course, by now I was well past the pontoon, and had to get away before anything else went wrong. I cast off the offending line, headed out into clear water, and didn't stop until I dropped anchor over the other side of the harbour. I was planning to anchor there anyway. I had to test the watermaker again, after refitting the 3-way valves so that the hoses, which the boatyard had fitted the wrong way round, no longer pumped all the water I had just made straight back into the sea. There was the sail cover to come off, the table to be stowed, all the usual adjustments to turn Samsara from country cottage into ocean-going greyhound. Now I had a broken stanchion to add to the list. There was one on eBay at less than half price, but that wouldn't arrive for 2 days. In 2 days, Windy promised a week of southwesterlies. Leaving a week later would make the weather even more unpredictable. More importantly, I would have only 18 days to get to the Ocean Cruising Club party in Pasito Blanco. Besides, I was all geared up to leave. I had the 4 loaves of bread, I deleted the eBay stanchion and ordered 2 new ones from a company in Gateshead who would send them to Agustin, the OCC's port officer and party host in Gran Canaria. But not yet. I know what happens if you're not there to pay the stupid Brexit import tax. They send it back. Finally, I motored back to the fueling berth, and this time moored without mishap. Just as well. The man who took my money had read the book. He followed the blog. Recognized your voice from YouTube. We had quite a chat. He's going to buy another book. If you've read Oldmansailing, you will know that I set great store by routine at sea. Now that navigation is a matter of poking buttons, peering at a screen and transferring the numbers to the logbook once a day, the ship's state of decorum could go downhill fairly quickly. I take as my model for this Paddy Macklin, the famously bibulous author of Captain Bungle's Odyssey, who explained that he always spent the first day drinking all the booze on the ship. After that, he didn't mind not having any. You will be relieved to hear that I still have 45 cans of beer, and both the bottle of rum and the bottle of whiskey remain unopened. No, my weakness is cake, and I knew better than to provision with enough for 42 days. After the first week, I wouldn't be able to get out of the hatch. However, on the last trip to Lidl, I did succumb to the impulse and chucked a packet of mince pies into the trolley. 1 packet wouldn't hurt. The trouble with statements like that is that they give rise to wedges and thin ends. Without so much as a twinge of conscience, I followed up the mince pies with a pot noodle. Which was how we came to be sailing past the Manacles, reasoning that it was tea time, and what with the Weatherspoons' 4-sausage breakfast and the unfortunateness at the fuel pontoon, I had missed lunch. So, broaching the packet of mince pies would not really be so terrible, would it? It was quite late by the time I thought about dinner. This had nothing to do with the ship's routine going to pot. Having a good kip after lunch and then not sleeping so long during the night is actually rather good for watchkeeping. Not that I seem to set great store by watchkeeping. But it meant that I did not reach for the onions until well after 2100. That was when a small tanker called the Torn Corrido triggered the AIS alarm. Considering this is arguably the most important alarm on the boat, you can judge that by the simultaneous alert on the screen showing a ship sinking at the proposed point of impact. The alarm is surprisingly tentative. It really should be accompanied by some sort of klaxon like the ones they have on destroyers, with one of those mechanical voices on the back of dust carts saying, "This vehicle is reversing. Stand clear." Only in this case it would say, "This ship is on a collision course. Take avoiding action at once. Come on, you lazy sod. Show a leg." Instead of which, I have become surprisingly well attuned to the little beep. This doesn't actually mean I leap straight out of bed. The AIS alarm is set to 2,500 feet. It's American. But 2,500 feet is 757 meters, so there is no immediate danger. Writing this off-ushant, I can't tell you how far 757 meters is in miles, nor why the Californian digital technician who programmed it for Garmin didn't suggest the hardware should do the calculation in-house, as it were, nor, come to that, why the ship's length is in meters, 182, yet her draft is shown in feet, 23.62, which meant that the Torn Corrido was a very, very small tanker indeed, Probably that's why she was proceeding westwards at only 9.7 knots, while everything else was doing at least 11. And she was due to cross my bow with rather less of a safety margin than her bigger friends had allowed. Come to think of it, was she going to cross my bow at all? Or was she planning to go round behind me? It wasn't easy to tell. I put the onion back in the basket and tried to extrapolate bearings and speeds. Of course, that only works with constant speeds, and the wind had dropped from around 18 knots down to about 13, which meant that the other watchkeeper's decision to go round behind me was now the wrong one. That's the trouble with sailing boats. I sat at the chart table and watched for the bearing to change. It didn't. If it wasn't for the little tanker, I would go up and shake out a reef. We'd had it in since Falmouth. Actually, it had been tied down since the trip from Plymouth. But the last thing you want to do on a collision course is lose steerage way, quite apart from leaving the chart table and trying to measure the agonizing slowness of the bearing changing. Samsara nodded on her way. Closer and closer. I thought of calling up the Tom Corrido's watchkeeper, but what would I say? I couldn't very well be traditional and ask his intentions. It was my intentions that were in question, from me as much as anyone else. At 0.5 miles, it became clear that he would go ahead of me after all. But then the wind freshened again and I speeded up. I could have furled the headsail to cut my speed, but I didn't. There must be some deficiency in my mental processes that means the idea of slowing down is never an option. Samsara picked up a bit more speed. The range of 0.5 miles became 0.4 miles. At 0.3 miles, I reached out into the cockpit and gave 3 tweaks on the port rein for the Aries self-steering. Each tweak alters the course by 6 degrees. When I looked ahead again, I saw a ship's stern with a bright white stern light. I swore I could feel her wake. So, you can see why all self-control went by the board, and I left the onion where it was and reached for the pot noodles. Day 1. Day's run 75 miles. You will be aware of the stones in the pot by now, the theory that doing the right thing brings its own reward. So it must have been the pot noodles that scuppered the watermaker, not to mention that damn mince pie. It's the bloody watermaker again. I was rather daunted by the size of the box of spares that arrived, but it turned out to be mostly full of polystyrene beans. All the same, there were 4 pre-filters to find room for, and the carbon block filter, which Jim at Sailfish Marine threw in as a consolation for all the trouble with stupid Brexit customs and DHL confusing Newport Isle of Wight with Newport Glamorgan. Then there was the spare low-pressure pump, and the seals and the O-rings. Never mind, I had 4 litres of water in bottles stowed under the starboard forward berth. I wouldn't be needing those now. I pulled them all out and stacked them next to the galley. It did occur to me to empty them over the side and chop up the plastic bottles for the gash, but you can't just pour fresh water into the sea at the start of an 1,800-mile passage. That would be a crime against nature, not to mention asking for trouble. The trouble turned up anyway. When dreaming of watermakers and weighing up the pros and cons with help from all my Facebook friends, each with their own individual opinion, I had decided that I would make water as soon as the sun joined the wind in pumping up the batteries after their overnight depredations. So it was with something of a swagger on this first morning of the voyage that I pressed the button. Nothing happened. Oh, the low-pressure pump whirred away, pumping in the seawater, but over at the main block under the starboard berth, There was no rhythmic click as the high-pressure pump forced it through membranes so fine that they won't even admit a sodium molecule. The needle on the control pressure gauge did rise slowly to between approximately 8 and 10 kilograms per square centimetre. I couldn't believe it. After all the trouble I'd had with this machine, from it being sold to someone else after I'd gone and paid for the thing, through to its adventure at East Midlands Airport and DHL's threat of sending it back to Spain. See the blog. Even the hose debacle. And now it was just going to stop working? Of course, the first thing to do was to ring Jim. I'd been ringing Jim at regular intervals for months, but now I was in the middle of the western approaches and well out of mobile range. If I had an SSB radio and a mail-a-sale interface, I could send him an outraged email. But I like being out of touch, don't I? Okay, so I like being out of touch when I'm sitting in the cockpit with a beer, not when I have my head in the bilges checking the inlet seacock. There was nothing wrong with it, of course, nor the outlet where the discharged brine is supposed to drain back into the sea. But there was another outlet, the breather, where the displaced air escapes from the tank as the water goes in. That had been making the most peculiar gurgling noises. You don't suppose that could be blocked, and the build-up of pressure was overwhelming the pump, which I suppose was a better prospect than the pump blowing up and rupturing the hull, leading to the inexorable sinking as foretold so graphically by the AIS. I stuck my head into the plumbing behind the heads. Now I had inspected 3 of the 4 compartments so rapaciously colonized by the water-maker, there was just one more, under the saloon floor. It was swimming with water. In fact, there was water splashing in there. Something was leaking, and leaking dramatically. No wonder I was pumping all the time. Did I mention that? Guess what? The hose from the inlet seacock, which was supposed to be feeding the pump, had detached itself and was pouring water into the bottom of the boat. There were 2 hose clips on it, as there should be. It was just that nobody had tightened them. While I was off in Salisbury having lunch with my sister Carol, particularly good cheese soufflé from the Core Brasserie, thank you very much, Josh, the shipwright, guitarist, at Richardson Marine, there, now I've named them, had failed to tighten the hose clips. And now I blamed them. Wouldn't you? I tightened the hose clips and checked all the others, of which there seemed to be an inordinate number. I put the floor back in place and pressed the button. The low-pressure pump began to feed the high-pressure pump, which started making its clicking noise. Air bubbles were observed in the control panel flow meter, as the manual advised they would be on first start-up. The needle on the pressure gauge rose to 10 kilograms per square centimetre. I was making water. I made lots of it. I filled the tank. But I'm still not going to pour those 4 bottles into the sea. This has been the voyage number 2, Falmouth to Grenada, by John Passmore and read by the author. We will return to it in 9 weeks' time. If you want to know what happens next and you can't wait, then it is, of course, available on Amazon in Kindle, paperback, and Audible editions. Until next week, goodbye.